So on behalf of the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, in partnership with the University of the District of Columbia, we welcome you back here to day 2 of our 3-day Spring 2022 Mini Professional Development Institute, focused on the building blocks for education, training, and workforce providers. Focused on how to strengthen the college and career readiness aspects of your program. Our presenter today is Sandy Goodman. She's director of the National College Transition Network at World Education, Inc., and we thank Sandy in advance for sharing her expertise with DC providers and partners. We will be recording these sessions, so we certainly appreciate it if you would keep your cameras off and unmute yourself during the presenter sections of this webinar, knowing that there will be ample opportunities for attendees to participate verbally by unmuting yourselves, chatting along in the chat, and also through the interactive Mentimeter tool that Sandy will be using. We will be posting the video and all of the handouts on the OSSI website at ossi.dc.gov, and you can currently find the handouts in our Wakelet, and that link is in our chat already, and we can chat it in again. Please plan to join us tomorrow when we have sessions at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., a 2-part series for integrating career awareness into the program design and service delivery. And then also please put a save the date on your calendars for another Mini Professional Development Institute that we have scheduled on June 6th, 7th, and 8th on the topic of student persistence. And we hand you over to Sandy now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stacy, and thanks again to the OSSI staff for having me and my colleagues, Danny and Kathleen, who many of you have met. So we're in part 2 of designing comprehensive student support services, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what we're going to talk about. First, let me tell you about the National College Transition Network, which I lead, based at World Education here in Boston. And NCTN provides technical assistance, professional development services to community colleges, adult education systems, and workforce development systems, all with the goal of building stronger programming and pathways for adult learners to achieve their educational, career, and economic goals. And so this whole institute is really brought to you in partnership with OSSI from the National College Transition Network. And I think that you'll find, if you're able to attend multiple days, that the content really is really complementary and interrelated. And we'll talk about, student supports. And if you attend tomorrow, you'll learn about tools you can use in a navigator program and so on. So I think OSSI has really put together topics that really work well together. And I hope you agree as we go along. So we, in the morning, we talked about really the navigator role and looked at some sample job functions and a sample job description, and also the knowledge, skills, and attributes of a navigator. Today's session, this afternoon session, we're going to kind of zoom out sort of at a broader level and really look at program design. And I'll get into that in a minute. I imagine that some of you attended the morning session, but I want to learn about that. So we're going to use Mentee for a few kind of level setting polls. And I do want to tell you, if you weren't here in the morning, that I'm really relying on the OSSI staff, and I am grateful to them for being my eyes on the chat and on you during the session, because Teams doesn't allow me to see more than what I have on my screen. So I will be relying on them. And I want to start by asking about how many folks do you think we have who aren't your office staff, Stacy, so I know what to look for in the Mentimeter.
Yeah, so we have 20 persons, so about 15 attendees.
Great, so that's the number I'll look for. So we're going to use a tool called Mentee, Mentimeter, and Mentee.com. And before you go there, let me just point out a few things if you haven't used it before. You're going to open up another browser if you're on a laptop or a tablet, or even on your phone if you have browser-enabled phone service, you can open up another browser. You certainly don't want to leave Teams. And if you are on a laptop or on a computer, I should say, and you don't want to open up another browser on that device, you can do Mentee on your phone or on another tablet, depending on what combination of devices you have. As long as you have a internet-enabled browser, you can play along. And if you have none of those things, you can put your responses in the chat. So what I want to show you is that this is the interface that you'll see once you log on. There'll be different questions and I'll prompt you at different times, but the main thing I want to show you here is to be sure to click submit when you're done answering the question. And as we move through a series of Mentee questions, you want to make sure that if you see this prompt, the presenter, that's me, has changed slide, then you want to go ahead and go to the slide. So let me back up a minute and say that the first thing I want to know is just who attended this morning's session. So I have a good sense of who was here, and some of you clearly have found your way, and now you should see the bar graph showing the response to that. So right now we have just 7 people have responded, 8 people, and you're evenly matched. Of half of you came this morning and half of you didn't. So we should get about 15 responses. So I'm going to give you about another 30 seconds or so, maybe a minute, to find your way to Mentee. That's
and
Mentee.
we have one person, Sandy, I'm sorry, Ms. King, was here this morning. She's been a diligent attendee, and so she was here this morning. She's putting it in the chat, so she may be unable to do that in Mentee.
All right, thank you and welcome. But let's still see if we can get a few more people into Mentee. So you're going to open up another browser, go to mentee.com and enter the code that hopefully you should see on the screen. And that will get you to an interface that looks like this. Well, looks like what I showed you on the slide.
And we did have one person say they needed the code, and we know that another person is toggling through on her phone. So I'll just call out the code if you need it. If you're on the Mentee site, it's 8471-6146.
Thank you.
And Sandy, Miss Miller's telling us what happens if it, I think if it's saying that you need to refresh, does that mean we're waiting for the next question?
Probably. I can't see the interface, but if it doesn't say click to go to the next question, it might just be that we're still on this question. We're just doing one question at a time. I'm not sure totally what that would look like. This is what it would look like if I have changed slides, but if I haven't changed slides, it should, I forget, to be honest, what it would look like, and I apologize for that. All right, so we're going to move on from this question, and so it looks like 8 of you and 9 counting the friend on the chat attended the morning session, and 4 of you didn't. That's no worry for those of you who didn't. Just know that we're going to move on to kind of design concepts, and you can always go look at the materials and the slides and the recording to back into sort of more specifics about the navigator role itself. I'm going to advance, so you should be able now to see, to click go to the next slide that the presenter has moved the slide. And now I just want to get a sense of, similar to this morning, who has a navigator, coaching, student support, advising role in your program. So this morning, what I said, and I'll say again here, I'm less concerned about whether you call the person a navigator and more concerned about whether you have someone whose primary function or a good chunk of their work is dedicated to career coaching, student support, advising. I'm going to keep using the term navigator, but when I do, feel free to plug in whatever term you call that person, transition specialist, education specialist, and answer the question as appropriate to your program and your role. So we've heard from 8 folks. Let's try to get to 12 or 13 before. Yes, we have a staff person who provides these kinds of services. No, we don't, or not sure. Maybe you're new to the program or you're still not clear about what I mean, and you're not sure if you have somebody like that. Let's see if we can get a few more folks responding to the poll before we go on. take about another 30 seconds, and I'll rely on you, Stacy, if there's any troubleshooting that's needed or any responses in the chat.
Neither so far.
Okay, so the majority of you have somebody in a navigator role, and now we will see, oh, even more. Great, 10 more seconds if there's one more person trying to formulate their response. So we know that you have somebody in this navigator role in your program. Now we'll see whether you are in fact that person. So I wanted to get a sense of who's here. So make sure you click, go to the next slide if what you're getting is the screen that says the presenter has advanced the slides. So are you a navigator, coach, student support person? Are you a teacher? Are you an administrator, or are you in a position that's not listed here? And this session is designed for any and all of you. We've got 7 responses. Let's see if we can get a few more before we move on. And I want to invite the folks that are in the yellow bar that says I'm in a position not listed here. If you wouldn't mind sharing what that role is in the chat, that will help me make sure to direct my comments appropriately. I feel like an auctioneer. We've got 9. Can we get 10 responses? We've got 10 responses. Can we get 12? Before I have to say going once, going twice, and advancing to the next slide.
And we got a lot of chuckles over here since we're together in our building on that. We do have a couple of replies from some of the people who may have selected other. So Denise Miller is the employment specialist. Daryl Robinson is telling us that he's wearing multiple hats, so he might have hats in 3 roles. And Nelsie is an employment specialist as well.
Oh, great. And the employment specialist, I think you'll find a lot of this helpful. And I usually say in any adult ed event, when I'm trying to get a sense of who's here, that I recognize that people wear multiple roles. So thank you for raising that. It remains true in our field. Great. So we have some coaches, navigators, student support folks, the employment specialists, administrators, and a teacher. And I think you'll all for sure get some helpful information from the session. So let me go through the different, here we go. So I'd love to just take a few moments to see if there's anybody from the first session, and really more than half of you attended the first session. If you'd be willing to, in the chat or by unmuting yourself, just share a little bit about what you took away from session 1. One, to help build the pathway to your brain and so that you can integrate those learnings beyond today, but also to share with folks that weren't able to attend this morning. You could give a little summary of something that you found new or interesting, or that you want to take away and think about more. Would anybody be willing to do that? Harder to hide because we know that 9 or 10 of you were here this morning.
And our numbers have ticked up to 25 total, but you are all able to click on your microphone and unmute yourself if you would like to make a comment. Please do.
Sure. I think earlier I enjoyed thinking about what was important in regards to that role. We looked at, we did a poll in the Mentee, and then had a follow-up conversation about whether the person navigating students through resources versus other things. So I think that was really, really helpful to me to just also see, not only think about what's important to me as I help support someone on my team who does that work, but to also think about, you know, how other people see that role as well. So we got to consider, what does that role look like? How do we support students? Because a navigator really could do a lot of different things, but we want them to be more focused on what's effective for students. And so that was really powerful for me.
Thank you. Very well said. Anybody else want to share a takeaway?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi. What I learned was that I really liked when you said that most of the time we're here to coordinate and orchestrate and not duplicate. And also that we don't have to be, I guess we don't have to be, I guess, professional or have many years of experience in like financial aid or housing, childcare. We just have to know what's available and who's out there to help with supporting our students. And that you said to that most of the time navigators or career coaches are there to collaborate and coordinate, integrating the curriculum and building networks of support. Um, and I like the resources that you gave us at the end. That already went on there. So thank you. That's what I learned during the first session.
Well, we've had two really excellent summaries that I'm sure will be helpful to the folks that weren't able to join us this morning. Look, we have time for one more takeaway if somebody else would be willing to unmute or put something in the chat, something different from what these two folks said, really better than I could say it. So thank you. But is there a third person that wants to share a takeaway? Let me just check and make sure. Is there anything in the chat before we go on?
Actually, there is one question. Ellen's asking, what was the line about coordinate? And then a second one I'll give you and you can address them, Sandy. And then Ms. King is noting that the navigator to assist with developing career plans, documenting goal progress, and addressing challenges and coordinating resources in the community and have knowledge but not necessarily expertise.
I think that was Ms. King's takeaway then too, maybe
Yeah.
to build on what somebody else said. So I think the last person that spoke talked about, I think she said that, I think I did say this and she said it really, she built on it really well, that the role is to coordinate and collaborate, but not, or orchestrate, but not duplicate. And what I mean by that is that there's certainly direct student support work that the navigator or the coach does. And you can look at the sample job description for sure to see that. But then there's a whole host of other kinds of resources, community services, programs that a student might need, and they will need the navigator's help connecting them to. And so what we were talking about is then the navigator's role is to coordinate, make referrals, just make sure students can get the information they need and the support they need without the navigator themselves having to be or being the specialist in domestic violence, mental health, housing assistance, public, fuel assistance, whatever the issue might be. But that they do serve a linking and connecting, and I use the term coordinating function there. So I hope that helps to clarify that. Thank you so much, everybody, for your takeaways and summaries. This is really the only thing I want to repeat from the morning, and I'll go through it much more quickly than I did this morning. And say again to the folks who weren't able to make it that this will make more sense, I think, after looking at the recording or at the sample job description. And mostly I just want to say that I can, share with you examples of navigator function and a sample job description, but ultimately that exact job and those exact duties and the way that you design the program is going to vary based on your very unique sets of circumstances in your program. And that includes program design and really what are your student goals, what are your program goals, ultimately, how are you designed? Are you designed to help students transition to education and training? Are you designed to help them transition specifically to employment? Maybe they're going on to an integrated education and training program, but your program design is one of the variables that will dictate Navigator program design. Certainly your student numbers and also the full-time equivalent of the Navigator are going to dictate really what they can achieve and what their priority activities and functions have to be, given the number of students they're responsible to support and the amount of time they have to work with. And then going back to this question of coordinating and collaboration, the resources and the partnerships that your program have in place will also determine what role the Navigator plays in actually like preparing workshops and presenting workshops on particular topics, or on inviting guests from partner organizations to present workshops, as an example. So for example, if you have a really close partnership with your local, workforce development career center, one-stop career center partners, ideally the Navigator wouldn't have to use time to plan career exploration and job search workshops. They would coordinate that and host a visit from a career center staff who would provide a workshop like that, or to help students directly with their resumes. If that partnership isn't in place or those resources aren't available, the Navigator might be somebody who's then helping a student with a resume. So those kind of factors really depend on what other resources, staffing internal to your program or through external partnerships and other resources are available. So from here forward, excuse me, we'll be working on sort of some new topics and contents, leaving behind a review of session 1. But again, I think it will make sense for everybody here. So as I said, this session is really focused on broader program design, and I like to call this designing for maximum impact. And here are a few elements that I think are really important to think about when you think about designing for maximum impact. So one is, you hear me, even though this morning we for sure talked about the Navigator person, the job description, the individual, the knowledge, skills, and attributes of that person. Ultimately, I think it's really important to think programmatically, not about an individual. For sure, most of our programs can only support one Navigator, and if we're lucky, even one full-time Navigator. And yet I urge you to think about this as a Navigator program and not an individual. So what do I mean by that? I mean that everybody's on board. This is a coordinated effort across your whole program. And if you're an administrator, and I know some of you are, that you're really setting that tone by establishing expectations that students will work with a Navigator, that a Navigator and the services of a Navigator are part and parcel of your larger program. Not just that a student comes for English class or high school equivalency, but they are coming to work with your entire program, and that includes a Navigator support. It also means establishing expectations for staff that the Navigator isn't out here on the side doing, like, the hand-holdy work while they're doing the, meat and potatoes of teaching, that you're all part of creating a student learning experience. You're all part of working together to support students' educational and career goals and their persistence and success. So that's what I mean about establishing expectations, and that's a programmatic approach. Other ways that we think about designing for maximum impact are to have Navigators for sure work individually with students, and we'll talk more about when that's most important, but also that a Navigator might work more efficiently and effectively if they also can work with students in groups. They can host group activities or workshops that they facilitate, or that they host for outside presenters, like the example I gave before about a career center staff doing a job search workshop. Again, thinking programmatically, designing for maximum impact means collaborating and coordinating across all staff. And that might mean, in terms of actually planning and delivering some contextualized integrated lessons that the Navigator and the teaching staff plan together. It also means establishing triage and early alert systems so that there's really good communication between instructors who have some information about students and their needs, and the Navigator who has possibly different information, but to make sure that everybody knows when a student is struggling, whether that's struggling academically, struggling personally, but struggling in a way that is getting in the way of their ability to achieve their goals in your program. Programmatic approach means having the navigator develop a program plan or a syllabus or a scope and sequence so that they're for sure, responding to immediate needs that students have day to day, but also mapping out activities and goalposts of where they want to be with students by when in your program. And again, this will depend on what your program goals are, but it might mean if you're a program that's kind of a bridge to an integrated education and training program, by when do students need to understand what that occupation is and what the IET program offers? By when do they need to have done whatever assessments or intakes might be necessary to enroll in that IET program? By when do they need to establish eligibility for funding if you're braiding funding from, local community college CTE or your workforce center? So those kinds of things, would be mapped out based on the goals of your program and making sure the navigator doesn't get too caught up in the day-to-day needs of students that they can't help them get to these other milestones. And then it also, designing for maximum impact can mean using data and perhaps data in different ways to really look at how could we target the navigator time and efforts proactively based on what we have learned from analyzing data. And we'll go through each of these in more detail, but these are the main features that I wanted to talk about today. And we're going to move to Mentee again, and I'm just going to ask you to respond by thinking about in your program, if you have a navigator or somebody doing support. And if you don't, you still might think about how do we integrate student support into our work. But you're going to basically do a rating activity where you say with each of the elements, we have a navigator program plan or curriculum in place. You'll start with 1, we don't do this at all, or 5, we do this regularly, or anywhere in the middle. And I'm going to release this Mentee so that we can do it. And so if you're in Mentee already, you don't need a new code, but you'll probably need to click that blue square that says present or advance to the next slide. And you go ahead and click it so that you can move to this slide too. So now everybody should see the maximizing impact Mentee slide and not my slide. And I'll give you, let me ask first if there are any questions about using the scaled rating or what I'm asking you to do. On the left is we don't do this at all, and on the right is we do this regularly, and you can rate yourself anywhere in between. It's always a little startling when the first entries come into the scale here. It shoots out. So we have two people. We have 3 people. Can we get to 5? We're aiming for 12 or 15 since I think some people came after we did the count last time. We've got 7, we've got 8. Can we get to 10? For sure, there's a little bit of reading involved here too, so I'll give a little more time for this. We've got 10, can we get to 12? know, I can't go back to the other data without disrupting this, and it's possible that 10 is about the number of folks that said they had a navigator in their program. But let me just give another minute or two in case any of the sliders are relevant to other people and that you want a chance to read and respond. Anything in the chat?
Not at this time.
All right, so we'll pause here because, like I said, I should have jotted down the number of programs who might feel confident answering these questions. So this is a really interesting view. It looks like the more common practice is meeting with the having a stated expectation that students meet with navigator, and the next most common is the navigator facilitating or hosting group activities and workshops. I want to ask if somebody I want to go from the top all the way down and just see if anybody's willing to share about a practice that they do. So I'd love to ask somebody who does have a navigator program plan or curriculum in place. If anybody for whom that's true would be willing to unmute or put in the chat and tell us a little bit more about, what that looks like. Did you develop it as an individual navigator? Is it something you inherited when you came into the program, something you built with colleagues?
I can say that we developed here at the Academy of Hope a rubrics that we use for each student, but we present it to the teachers, and it talks about punctuality, engagement. Um, it talks a little bit about what the scores are in classes, and that helps me as an employment specialist to see where they are when it comes to employment. So we present this to the students' teachers or instructors, and they can rate them on a scale of 1 to 4. Are they prompt? And it can be a scale of 1 to 4. And these are the people that we probably work with low scores. We work with them more on their punctuality if that was an issue doing the rubrics when they were completing it.
Oh, that's so interesting. And I appreciate, and I think you're saying that you put that in, you were thinking about that when you put in the program plan. I also see that as really an effective way of using data to target your activities. I think you're also saying that getting that assessment and that input about the student helps you think about how you're going to target your work as an employment specialist. Is that correct?
Yes, it does. And it also would help us to work with them on some of the barriers that they may have that doesn't pertain to the classes at all. It could be
Great.
something going on at home. And we refer them. I don't deal with them per se,
Yep.
particularly, but we do have, I guess, the navigator, which is our student support. We would refer them to student support.
Yeah. Great. So great example of having some sort of system in place and also using data. What about somebody who said that you facilitate or your navigator facilitates or hosts group activities and workshops? Would you be willing to unmute or put in the chat an example of that?
I can share. So I work at Youthfield Public Charter School, so alternative school, and I just put in the chat that we don't necessarily have a navigator program. I mean, we do have a support team. We don't call them navigators, so there's something like case managers, but they're here at the school, but they also do check in when students aren't here and things like that. But as far as my role, I work with the transitions department. So I'm in charge of helping our students to prepare for college and career readiness. So I host workshops. Actually, today was a day where I taught 2 workshops this morning. And so my workshops are all about skills that they need. Like today was about time management. And so it's just touching on different like life skills that they're going to need as they move forward with whatever their next steps are. For some of them, I mean, it's alternative high school, so the goal is for every student to earn their high school diploma, but some of them may transition out before getting there, so we at least want them to walk away with certain skills and tangibles and things like that. So like on our end, outside of even workshops, we also have resume, cover letter. We have certain requirements that all students have to have before they transition out, because they age out at the age of 25. So at that point, they are young adults ready for society. At that point, have already started working. So we just want to make sure that they're fully prepared. And because our school is multilingual, we have Latino and Black students. So making sure that it's kind of double preparation for our students that are not English speakers.
Thanks so much. Great examples of types of workshops and topics. I wanted to ask then about somebody who collaborates with instructors and actually is in the classroom to work with instructors on some class lessons. Is there somebody who's willing to give an example of what kind of lessons you might work with an instructor on in the classroom?
I guess I maybe I shouldn't have mentioned the rubrics, but we also have a workforce development section in my department. And in the morning before they start their classes, we have a career workshop class. And we also talk about resume mock interviews, time management. We talk about LinkedIn and how important those type of things are for our students once they completed either any program or their GED. And that class is just an hour, maybe to an hour and a half if possible. And we conduct that class right before they go into their math or their career development classes here at the academy.
Thank you. And it's not integrated into the math class, for example.
No, it's not. It's like a
Great.
separate class.
Okay, thank you. And we'll talk more about that integration in a little bit later. I think you also shared about data. Let me ask if there's any person who hasn't spoken up yet who would just say how you communicate or what your policy is if it's a stated expectation that the student will meet with a navigator. That was a high ranking one, so it seems like there should be a few people for whom that's true. If there's anybody who hasn't spoken out yet that wants to share an example of how you do that. All right, well, we'll move on, but I'm really glad to see that that was a high ranking. That again, that's a kind of a key to a programmatic approach, that students understand, even if they're just there to get their high school equivalency, your program includes other things that you think that they will benefit from, and that's part of the expectation or requirement. So let's talk a little bit more about group activities. And it sounds like a number of you are doing group activities as part of the work, the navigator work in your program, but I want to just highlight a few things about it. Sometimes I work with a lot of navigators who haven't been doing group activities because the demands for their time to just help individual students with their student, issues that come up really stretch them, or because their students are already in classes and the program hasn't built in other expectations for students to attend other workshops or group activities. But the reality is group activities help navigators work more efficiently and at scale. They help them share information for students rather than one person here, one person there. There's a lot of information that navigators are sharing with students that they could all hear together. Group activities, when designed well, also give students a chance to be peer support for each other and to build their own networks. This happens organically in classes all the time, and you could do that even more if there were more workshops and chances for students to build their teamwork skills together, to share in problem solving together. Some programs, navigators have done things like common scenarios that students are trying to troubleshoot around childcare or transportation, and getting them to come up with solutions together builds so many skills for them and also builds their connection to each other, which is just so important to persistence. And also group activities can enable navigators to design contextualized classroom instruction with teachers. So what I mean by that is that although separate workshops are great and they're better than no group activities, it also means that your students need to be able to give more time to your program. And again, if you state that expectation more clearly up front, it's more likely that they will be prepared for that. But if navigators can work also with instructors and say, all right, I need to do a workshop with students on how to do labor market research. Can we work that into your high school equivalency lessons on interpreting graphs and charts? Can we work it into a math lesson on, averages, mean, mode, and, median? Those are ways that students could be learning some skills they need to learn from the navigator around career exploration, while also continuing to build their academic and language skills. So those are examples of what we mean by contextualized navigator and teacher instruction. So those are some strengths of and reasons why group activities can be really helpful. I wanted to just talk a little bit about why you would choose group activities over individual activities, when it would be appropriate. We've talked about some of this already. When you're sharing information that's common and to a number of people, group activities are great. When it's a skill building activity, career research was the example I gave. You can actually teach that to a group of people rather than one-on-one. Help them problem solve common issues and questions. Supplemental sort of instruction, or when you're having guest speakers or doing, an employer panel to help, or do group mock interviews, group activities really work there. Certainly a navigator still needs to have time for individual one-on-ones with students. It's important for relationship and trust building. There are, of course, going to be issues that a student needs to talk about in confidence. And students are going to have immediate needs. You're not going to say to somebody in crisis, oh, we're doing a workshop on that next week, come back then. You're going to respond immediately, and there's no question about that. There's times when you need to give a student feedback on how they're doing in their classroom, or looking over their education and career planning goals, and maybe they haven't set realistic time frames. You want to, be able to have a one-on-one with students then. And also, of course, if you need to do a progress check-in, how are they making progress on their plan? How are things going in their classes? Those are great times for one-on-ones. And of course, just like teachers do, sometimes the navigator can create opportunities to move around the room and talk to students individually in the context of a group workshop. So I wanted to emphasize group activities, and certainly suggest that they're not mutually exclusive, that you want to do both, and you want to be deliberate about what makes sense for group activities and what makes sense for individual activities.
Sandy, we have a couple of notes in chat. So Beth Kushner was noting, thank you, Beth, that they have at BRIA a resume workshop with different centers where the transition team talks about tailoring a resume to a specific job, and the math instructor talks about adding metrics to your resume. Nice. And the English teachers talk about the most common grammar and errors that may be made on resumes. So thank you, Beth, for that. But Janine had a question that she would love to hear more from some of the attendees who do have a school or a program in which that expectation about meeting with the navigator is a stated expectation. So if we have enough time, Sandy, would you like to invite someone to share on that before we move on, if there's time?
Yeah, I would love to. I like you, Janine, I also wanted to hear an example, and we didn't get anybody to speak up, but maybe at the prompting of Pierre, we will.
Maybe. Yeah, so we just got someone in the college navigator position, and so as a part of their first 90 days, we because they were also promoted to the position, we're asking them to make sure 100% of our graduates have a plan who are already graduated during this course of the school year. But if there's a way to, I would love to hear from a school if there's something being done to ensure that all students are hearing from a navigator, or that is it a requirement, or, I would love to hear from a school that may be doing that. And you can also just put it in the chat for me. Sorry to interrupt the lesson.
No, thank you.
I just would love to hear something about that.
I mean, I can start yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I can, at BRIA, for at least our 2-gen program, we do have, I believe, 3 student parent-teacher conferences built in throughout the year. So for our students that are that have these meetings, they have both their like academic conference with their English teachers, and then they have what we call transitions conference with like the transitions team. So we kind of have it built in 3 times a year so they can meet one-on-one and like update their transitions plan.
Thank you. That was helpful. Okay.
3 might be the magic number. I was going to say that I've worked with a lot of programs that in thinking about a cycle or a semester have said 3 times, at least once at the beginning for them, for the navigator to get to know the student, to understand their goals, to talk to them about what they, the navigator, can offer. One time midway, you know, as a check-in and see where they are in their progress or their plan. If there's not a requirement that they complete with an education and career plan, and then a 3rd time to help them sort of transition either to, you know, the next level or to training in another program, to college or to work. But at least those 3 times as check-ins to figure out what they need and how to get them to those. For programs that are working with like much more, you have to have a written plan, like the last person was saying. There's been more required meeting times, you know, more frequently than that in group settings or individually to get them to really through the process of researching a plan and developing it. And I just want to say again, though, that all of that really has to start with how you describe your program in its totality and how you market it and what the expectations you share with students at intake about your program, including these things, and also making sure, like I said, that teachers are bought in and see it as a valuable component of the program that's not pulling students away from them. I think you'll agree that most teachers, when they see how well the navigator helps keep a student in the seat, not take them away from the seat, that when there's that kind of collaboration, it really pays off. So I want to go through a couple of examples of some of the other elements that we were talking about. So one was having a navigator plan or a scope and sequence or a curriculum. I put a blank template in the folder that in the materials that Asi is sharing, but I just wanted to show you. This is just a very simple template where a navigator or program would sort of decide, you know, how many weeks do we have with the student if it's a defined program? What do we need to plan out? What are the touchstones? So here's an example where there's like a group activity, it's orientation. Who else is involved? We're always talking about leveraging and including partners and other resources, staff and guest speakers. What materials, just to help them think about really the concrete logistics of the activity, and what are the desired outcomes. At the end of orientation, students will have a better sense of their goals, the steps to achieve them, and an understanding of what barriers they might have and how to address them. They'll also learn about policies, procedures. So when this plan is built out, I'm showing you an example of week 1, but it would, you know, list kind of weekly activities or daily activities, depending on the intensity of the program. This is an example actually of a scope and sequence, and I also have put links to these documents. There's 2 versions from 2 Massachusetts programs. This is an advisor, they call them advisor, you could call it a navigator, scope and sequence, where they've really mapped out units, instructional units that they work with students, both in their own workshops and within contextualized classes. But they're navigator type content, self-knowledge, career exploration, career planning, 21st century skills. And this is a description of the units that are in the scope and sequence. And then I wanted to show you just the structure and the content of the navigator scope and sequence. So every unit includes the time frame that they're going to complete the unit, the guiding questions, key vocabulary that they'll need to make sure students understand. It's aligned to standards, both can be college and career readiness for adult education standards, but also in Massachusetts, there are standards for the advising program, so they're aligned there. Every unit says what the advising program will do. what the activities are, what the learners will be able to do at the end of the unit. It outlines activities and checkpoints for each unit, and also has some recommendations for how to adapt it for remote learning. So these are called advisor scope and sequence. One is from Lawrence Adult Education in Massachusetts, and the other is Webster Adult Education. And as I said, I've put links to our Massachusetts Professional Development Center, which is called SABASE, and on the website, you can download both of these scope and sequence. And then I talked a little bit about triaging as well, and that's when navigators and instructors together are sharing information about in a shared place to log concerns they have about a particular student, and to identify whether it's kind of a high level of concern, a low level of concern, or a medium level of concern, so that together, through a shared document, but also through actual kind of regular meetings between the navigator and instructors, together they can decide what course of action is needed. If there's a high level of concern, they're going to decide right away what follow-up is needed, when it's going to happen, who's going to do it. If it's a low level of concern, it doesn't mean that person doesn't get support, but it means they're doing well, that we can just, keep an eye on them, but we don't need to immediately check in with them. We want to focus on somebody who's really kind of, about to fall off, and we might lose if we don't focus that energy and attention. So that's just an example of both triaging and shared communication, or student status log that instructors and navigators can share together. So I want to spend the last minutes that we have talking about how data can inform program design. And the person that spoke up earlier about using the rubric to kind of assess where students are at and what needs they're going to have as they move towards employment was a really great example of using data to inform program design, but also to target the navigators' activities in a focused way and in a proactive way. So I'm going to give an example of how you might ask a question to understand trends in student issues, what sources of data you might use, and how you could use the data proactively. And then I'm going to invite you to share some ideas yourself in Mentee. So here's an example moving across horizontally. One question might be, what are common reasons for absences? And the source of information could be attendance logs, navigator notes, and proactively that information might be used to give text nudges to students when I'll explain in a minute. Resource referrals to address the common absences, information workshops, peer support, and transparency. So what I mean by that, for example, is a common absence might be, that students start to drop off after there's been a holiday break. So the navigator might be more proactive in texting students over the holiday or just before it's time to come back. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. Hope you've had a great time. The transparency might be to say, before everybody goes on break, it's not uncommon to lose momentum. It's frequent. Don't worry if that happens to you. Don't feel bad if that happens to you. But we want to see you back here. I'm going to remind you. I'm going to call you. I'm going to text you. But know that it's not unusual. Or after doing 4, GED tests, and you saved the one that's most challenging for you till last. It's not uncommon. That's okay. Let's talk about it. I'm going to nudge you. I'm going to remind you. I'm going to share information about kind of often trends we see about other students, and that might be true for you too. So, and an information workshop might be, we've noticed in the logs and in my navigator notes that students are, having trouble with transportation. Let's do a workshop to talk about resources or problem solving around transportation. Let's see if we can offer some peer support to figure out if we can help students travel together. So that's an example of using data perhaps differently than you've used it at other times. Another question might be, what are common career goals? Well, if you're, look at intake forms where you ask student about goals, look at the information you collect when you do career exploration activities, see where they have common goals, and can you put students in pairs and groups so they can work together to learn more about that career, maybe be buddies as they think about going on to an integrated education and training program, or do informational interviews together with somebody in that field. You can bring in guest speakers to talk to a group of students interested in a common career, or they might team up to do research activities. So those are just ways to think about using data to focus and target your time, since your time is so stretched and your time is so stretched and you don't have a lot of resources to add more staff, but you might be able to think about how to target your efforts more proactively. We won't have time actually to do the Mentee, but let me just ask if there are other ideas you have in thinking about this for how you might use data in different ways and how you might use it. And you'd be welcome to unmute or to put something in the chat. Or if there's questions about what I mean about how to use data differently, if these examples I've given aren't clear.
No questions in chat just yet, but please do go ahead and use the chat or unmute yourselves for any questions about this material.
Does it make sense to think about using data this way? Do some of you already look at this information and analyze it to direct your efforts and your activities? The example of that rubric was a great example, and there may be others, and I know your peers would love to hear them if you have them. All right, well, let me go on then. We're not going to do that because we ran out of time. I wanted to, just like I did this morning, make sure folks, as we're thinking about this idea of coordinating services and supports and getting to know the resources in your communities, in your neighborhoods, that if you're not already aware of the full spectrum, that you might find 211, I think it's 211.org. Now I realize I didn't put the URL here. That you might find this national database helpful to find local services and resources that you're not aware of. So I always like to just make sure people know about it. I wanted to repeat something from this morning, which is to let you know that we have a free online self-paced course, kind of an introduction to the navigator role. It's called Finding True North. And the URL, I think, will be in the Wakelet, but it's available to you anytime. It's a great resource for onboarding new navigators to the role. There are some other resources on the NCTN website. That's collegetransition.org, and that URL will also be in the Wakelet. We have a guide to advising students with foreign degrees, a guide on using tech tools for navigators and coaches, and hopefully you were in yesterday's session on our personal and workplace success skills library. And if not, you can go find that recording up on the website as well. And if you're really interested in learning more about this education and career planning for navigators, but also for teachers, and to think about contextualizing and teaming up to work on education and career planning together, I hope you'll come to integrating career exploration in tomorrow's session. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to just see if there are any last questions or comments. And I also just really want to thank those of you who spoke up with such great examples of the work that you're doing. I'm going to stop sharing. That's what I want to do for these last minute.
And while everyone is thinking and get their last questions or last thoughts together, I wanted to let you know that Tracy Richard has posted a survey in the chat. It's a very streamlined survey of just a few questions so that you can help give us feedback on today's session so we can continue to design professional development offerings that meet your needs. Thank you.
Well, I'll say thank you to you again. This was a really great workshop. Thanks again for the resources and the information. very helpful. So I appreciate you as well as the Aussie team for making this happen. And you guys have a great afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you. And I'm so glad to hear that you say that you'll be there tomorrow at Integrating Career Awareness into the Program Design and Service Delivery, Parts 1 and 2 at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. tomorrow with more of our World Education presenters. Thank you all so much for being here.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so